Hello, this is Mark Mazells with Mississippi State University Extension Forestry. I wanted to come to you today to speak a few minutes about forest management considerations. These are all items that we should consider as forest managers and forest landowners as we move through the management of our forest, whether that's at the very beginning of the stages of site prep, reforestation, or to the final harvest. There's all types of things we need to consider. So let's start here. The best way to get in touch with me is via email at mkm2@msstate.edu. I can always be reached via email and will respond to you as quickly as possible with any questions you may have about this or any other items concerning your forest management. So when we're talking about forest management considerations, you see a list here of items. Each of these items are very important depending on which stage of our forest management we're in or how old our forest is. These are things we should all consider. Now, each one of these topics could be their own separate presentation, and some of them could be an hour or multiple hours long. So if you want more information, more detailed information, let me know, and we will try to put together a program that goes into more details. Or we do have extension publications that talk about each one of these topics as well that I could provide to you that goes into more detail. So what is a management plan and why do I need it? Or do I need one? That's a question I get quite often. In fact, most of the landowners across the state of Mississippi and across the nation do not have a management plan. That leads to several issues, just not necessarily managing your forest in the most efficient manner from an economic and a biological standpoint. So what needs to be included in our management plan? So one of the first things that should be included would be your goals and our objectives for managing that property. What are you wanting to grow? Why are you doing this? Are you wanting to manage for saw timber? Are you wanting to manage pines, hardwoods? Are you wanting to manage for wildlife and recreation aspects? Those all need to be stated up front, and then based on those goals and objectives, your forester and natural resource professional can help you develop things to do to your forest to reach those goals and objectives in the most efficient manner possible. The other good thing about a management plan is it's a roadmap for you as the forest landowner to make sure that you are doing things in a timely manner to keep your trees growing and staying healthy, and therefore getting to your goals and objectives in a more timely manner. The other good thing about having that management plan is it allows your spouse or kids or business partners to understand what has been done on the property and what the future plans are for the property as well. That way, or even for you as the landowner yourself, there's things in forest management that we don't do on a yearly basis. A lot of times it's multiple years or several years before we do anything. So having that management plan that you can go pick up or look at on your computer helps you know when the next task needs to be done on your property. So those are all very important things for the management plan. The other thing is if you are participating in any type of conservation program, they will require a management plan as well in most cases. So that's another good reason to have it is if you want to, any incentive programs or things like that, it's going to require it. Also, if you are managing your property or getting it certified through one of the multiple certification programs out there, they will require you have that management plan in place. So it's a very good idea to have it for multiple reasons, as you can see. So we're basically going to start from site prep and work our way through the different things we need to consider on our forest. You may not be at this stage, but it's something you hopefully will have to consider in the future as you manage your forest lands. So when we're dealing with site prep, we're looking at the area that's going to be getting ready to replant it after either a harvest, or maybe it's an old field or a pasture or an ag crop land that's now being converted to forest land. So there's several things we need to consider based on which it is and what's out there basically. So if it's a clear cut, maybe there's a lot of debris that was left on site. You need to make sure that you can, just from a standpoint of making it easy to get those trees planted, Whether you're doing hand planting or mechanical planting, that debris makes it very difficult to do in a lot of cases. So you may have to get a bulldozer to come in and push some of that debris out, or you may do a site prep burn where you, after it's been harvested and it dries out, you come in and do a site prep burn to eliminate a lot of that debris. Another thing we have to consider, this is especially true for the old fields or ag lands. A lot of times those develop what we call hard pans. And that hard pan makes it really difficult for the roots to grow deep into the soil as they should. So you may have to hire someone with a dozer with a ripping shank to come basically break that hard pan to allow those roots a better ability to grow deeper into the ground. Another thing that we have to consider is a site in a low area that does not drain very well. If it is, then we may have to do, like you see in this picture here, have a dozer that comes in and actually makes a bed that we plant those seedlings in to help them with the drainage issues that are out there on that particular property. The other thing on site preparation is we want to make sure that there's basically as little competing vegetation out there as possible, especially within those rows where the trees are being planted. Survival of our seedlings highly correlates with having no other competition around. So that's a very important step that sometimes landowners do not do to save some of the expense or cost associated with that, but it's something you need to consider as well. Moving on to regeneration or replanting the forest, we want to make sure we're looking at these 4 different items here. The first being the species and site relationship. Basically what we mean by this is looking at your soil types in your soil maps to determine which soils are there and which species of trees grow the best on those soils. Not every soil type can grow every species of tree that's out there. Some do really good for some and not well for others. So it's very important that you match the tree species to your particular soil types on your property. The next thing we want to look at would be whether we're doing natural regeneration or artificial regeneration. Natural regeneration can be done for both oaks, hardwoods, and pine species. As you can see in the picture, one of the bad things about natural regeneration is you get tons of seedlings that come up. You don't need that many to grow to the final harvest, so you may have to come in and do what we call a pre-commercial thin to reduce those number of seedlings. The good thing about natural regeneration is there's really no cost associated with it. Another thing to consider with natural regeneration is the time period that you need to do this. So if you're doing natural or plan to do natural regeneration, you really need to look at what's out there the year before, maybe even up to 7 years before you do that final harvest. Make sure that you've got the right type of species and seedlings underneath those trees before you do that final harvest, so that your next stand of trees will be exactly what you want to have out there. That's particularly important when you're dealing with hardwoods. Making sure that the species that you want to grow into your future forest is there before you do the final harvesting of that property. Now, with artificial regeneration, we do that primarily with our pine species, just because we can control the genetics, the competing vegetation as well, and plant the trees exactly where we want them as well. So there are costs associated with it, but you don't have to come back in and do a pre-commercial thin. As far as hardwoods, regeneration using artificial regeneration, it can be done. It's very costly just because the seedlings are a little bit more expensive. And there's been some studies that show that the survival rate isn't necessarily better by doing the artificial regeneration. It really depends on the next topic. What's your seedling stock or types? So that's something else to consider is what genetic improvements do I want to see in my seedlings that I'm planting? Do I want to plant a very specific species with the genetic improvements associated with it? The more genetic improvements we have in our seedlings, the more they're going to cost. So that's something else to consider as well. And the last thing to consider with regeneration or replanting versus forest is what spacing do we want to do? that plays an impact or has an impact on the number of seedlings you have to order. It also helps, and it depends on what your goals and objectives are. If you're wanting to manage for, say, quail, your spacing is going to be a lot less than if you were managing for strictly saw timber management or growing pine poles. So that all has to go into consideration when you're doing regeneration or replanting. That's something a consulting forester or a good natural resource professional can really help you make those decisions. As we're moving through, basically from the start to the beginning of the growth of our forest, the management of our forest, we always have forest health issues to deal with, whether that's insects, pests, or diseases. Now, from a biological standpoint, good forest management will help reduce the risk of having insects, pests, and diseases moving into our forest. It will not completely eliminate it, but it can reduce our risk by doing things, thinnings, and other forest management activities at certain times during the age or management of our forest can reduce these risks. So that's something that you really want to work with a consulting forester to help reduce those risks, and they can make sure that you're doing things in a timely manner. Again, this is another good thing from that forest management plan is it can help you know when to do certain activities to reduce these risks. Now, hopefully at some point in your management, you'll have to do some thinning and harvesting of your forest. There's also other times where we may be doing other things that we're using contractors or different vendors to come in and help do the site prep or planting of the trees or prescribed burning. So anytime you have a vendor or contractor working with your property, make sure that you check the references, that you're dealing with reliable individuals. The most important thing for you and for that contractor as well is to have that contract in place. That contract kind of lists out what's being done, why it's being done, and the steps that need to be done to protect you and also that contractor. So it's always very important to have, just from a business standpoint, to have that contract in place. Now, a little bit more about thinning and harvesting. So how do we go about marketing our timber? It really depends on the type of timber you have, the mills that within a certain area or radius of your property. For instance, in North Mississippi, we have a lot less mills than we do in South Mississippi. So that plays an impact on how we market our timber as well. So we'll talk about a little bit more about marketing here in just a second. So anytime you're doing activities on your forest, you want to make sure that best management practices or BMPs are being followed. Our loggers are going to follow those from several standpoints. In Mississippi, our BMPs are not mandatory. In other states, they are. But if you're managing your property through a certification program, BMPs are required. It is a mandatory practice at that point. So it's always a good practice to have BMPs in there. And these are activities to maintain the productivity of your forest and not really do any damage to it. Another thing to consider when you're doing thinnings and harvesting operations is what type of method is going to be used, particularly when we're doing thinnings. There's several different ways, whether we're doing every number of rows being removed, so removing a certain percentage of trees, or are you doing an operator select harvest, where that guy that's running the cutter goes in and basically removes the row, and he can go in and select the remaining trees that need to be harvested. Those are all different things to consider. The other thing is kind of a time schedule from the time you sign the contract or make the deal to have your trees cut. A lot of times the landowners don't think about or don't realize that those contracts can be for up to 18 months. Basically meaning that that logging firm has up to 18 months to come in and do the harvest on your property. And I have seen situations where it comes down to month 17 and 2 weeks, and they finally move in and get the property harvested. So that's just something to keep in consideration from your time point in your management as well. So a little bit more about markets. It's very important that we look at where our property's at and also the number of mills within a certain radius of our property. In particular, we want to make sure we need mills that need the type trees that we're growing. So basically, what size tree, what species of tree do we have out there that's being harvested? So if you don't have a mill very close that needs that particular species or size of tree, that's going to be a lower cost to you as a landowner, or lower income to you as a landowner, because it's further for that log truck to deliver that wood to that particular mill. So you see here, this is basically a 50-mile radius from Carthage, Mississippi. You'll notice in here there's a lot of sawmills, but very few or no pulp mills in this area. North Mississippi has that issue, not just in Carthage, but basically north of I-20. And you may say, why do we have 50-mile radius here? The last several years, the average haul distance for a log truck from when the trees were cut to the mill that was being delivered was about 52 to 55 miles. So 50 miles is just a good starting point. That does not mean that mills are not having wood or trees delivered to them from further away. 75 miles is another good kind of area to look at as well. Again, when we branch out to 75 miles from Carthage, we have more options. Now, one of the site visits I did about 2 weeks ago was with a landowner in North Mississippi, even further north than this. And he had done a couple of things really well. He had worked with a really good logging firm that's done a great job of merchandising their trees. His trees being harvested are being delivered to 6 different mills, some within 20 miles of his property and some up to 100 miles away. So these are just good averages. The wood being cut from your property may go even further than that, but the markets play a huge impact on what we receive as stumpage prices for our trees. So that's something to consider as well. So talking about income, what are some of the financial and economic things that we need to consider? How am I paying for and making money off growing trees on my land? So the cost associated with that can be everything from site prep to the seedlings being planted to the labor costs for those. Maybe you're doing a prescribed burn every 2 to 3 years or longer on your property. Annually, we have costs that we pay for taxes. That's something else we need to keep in mind as well. Income from our forest properties is usually on an irregular basis, not necessarily something we're getting on an annual basis, depending on how big your land is, your land holdings are. You may be able to get annual income, but most of us aren't able to from harvesting trees. Now, there's other ways to make income off your land, and that could be leasing the land for recreational purposes, such as hunting leases or fishing leases. If you have an area that's really, maybe you have a barn or a pavilion that's really nice, and there's always outdoor venues such as weddings and retreats are looking for those type of venues to host events. That's another great way to bring in additional income. Other ways to making income, if you're growing pine trees, you could do for a certain amount of time during the age of your stand management, you could harvest pine straw from the property. So those are different streams of income that comes in or could come in that are things to consider as well. Anytime we're talking about managing our forest lands, there are risks associated with it. And those are things we need to take into consideration for our economic planning as well, whether that's insects, disease, or even natural disasters. One of the things we just mentioned was taxes. Anytime we're doing any type of management activity on our land, we have taxes that can be or will be paid, or there's ways we can help reduce our tax burden by being able to deduct certain expenses. So this is a topic that we can spend hours and hours upon and not cover everything in enough detail. There's a really good website, as you see here, timbertax.org, that has a wealth of information on timber taxes. One thing I will say is some of the information there is needs to be updated. So it's always important that anytime we're dealing with tax issues, that we're dealing with a certified public accountant, a CPA, or even a tax attorney that knows all the tax code that's out there, specifically dealing with forest taxation. Because if you can cost yourself a lot of money or a lot of tax money by not doing things correctly. So 2 things that we want to talk about real quick is the type of ownership structure that you have for your forest land. There's basically three types, whether it's a hobby owner, an investment owner, or a business owner. Farm is a special category of business, so that's why I'm saying there's only three types. If you take nothing else from this presentation, do not claim yourself as a hobby owner of your forest land, particularly from a tax standpoint, because that really limits your ability to take advantage of the tax code. Talk with your tax preparer to get more details on that, or attend one of our future timber tax workshops to get more information on that as well. So another thing, a good thing about taxes is we can have some tax advantages from growing our forest land. The trees we plant, the seedlings we plant, they're growing in size, growing in value. But that appreciation is not taxed until those trees are cut. One big thing is income from harvesting our trees is not susceptible to ordinary income taxes. It's subject to our capital gains rate taxes, which is substantially less than ordinary income tax rates. So make sure that when you harvest your timber that you're taking advantage of that capital gains rates instead of ordinary income rates. Again, that could save you anywhere from up to 25% on your tax bill by taking advantage of those capital gains rates. Also, how we handle our expenses throughout the management of our forest kind of relates back to how we structure our ownership, but there's some tax code that allows us to do deductions or credits or itemize some of our expenses throughout the management of our stands. The other thing to take advantage of would be a reforestation tax credit or program or incentive program to help us with reforestation expenses. These are all things that we cover in more detail on our timber tax workshops as well. So another kind of thing that deals with taxes or estate planning is, why is this important? Why do we want to have a legacy or estate plan in place? In talking with most landowners, we want to make sure that the property and the forest that's associated with it is passed on to our spouse or kids or grandkids after we're gone. So basically building our legacy and passing it on to that next generation. If you don't have a plan in place, I've seen this happen multiple times, and also attorneys and estate lawyers that we deal with in some of our programs have seen it happen sometimes within weeks after the person passes away. That property is up for sale because there's no plan in place. So it's very important that that is what you're wanting, that you're dealing with your spouse and your kids and your grandkids, and get everyone on the same page and have this estate plan in place. And that helps reduce the burden to them when you're gone. And it also significantly helps keep that land within the family and that forest management continuing into the future. So it's very important that you seek professional advisors when you're doing this. Well, those attorneys, accountants, real estate appraisals, consulting foresters, and others are really good people to have working with you to develop your legacy or estate plan. And with that, I know we've covered a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So if you have any questions or comments, send me an email at mkm2@msstate.edu, or you can also go on any of our social media or extension website and look for publications and other videos that we put out there as well. So with that, I hope giving you some ideas to consider and things that you may not have thought of as well. So at any point you have questions, let me know, and we'll do our best to help you out moving to the future. Thank you.